All right. I'm just double checking, making sure we're live. We still got, here we go. Okay. All right. Cool. All right. We are live. I'm getting a text from my buddy Nathan Hoffer, who is works for Lost and Found. So welcome. I'm so glad you're here. Hopefully I'll get a text from him saying that he can see some stuff. My name is Josh Ribidoll. This event is how to live mentally well and crush it during difficult times. And I want to give a big thank you and a big shout out to Lost and Found. They are lafprevention.org, and their social media is at Resilient Today, both on Facebook and on Instagram. And they are an incredible organization that helps students discover lifelong resilience. And that's what we're here to talk about. And I just got confirmation from my buddy Nathan, who works over there, that we are indeed cooking. So amazing. So I want to thank them. I want to thank Nathan for helping set this up. And then, of course, so my name is Josh Ribidoll. I'm with the I'm Possible Project. And we are an organization that is dedicated to engaging, educating, and creating programming around suicide prevention, mental health, resiliency, things of that nature. And so this is really a perfect time to talk about this. And I know we're all going through some really difficult times in different ways. It's a really strange time, and I work in mental health, and I'd say even for me, like the guy who knows how to cope and do different things for himself. Even I'm struggling at times, I can tell you, and I didn't necessarily plan on jumping right into this piece and this component to start, but I think it's really important to bring this up, that over the past 36 hours, and I want to bring this up to you and I'll explain why, but over the past 36 hours, I have experienced a tremendous wave of anxiety, and I live with generalized anxiety disorder and also with clinical depression. And for the most part, I'm really good about managing these things. And in fact, I still am. But it was something, and I can't quite explain the feeling, but I know that my body is grieving for these things that we're losing: income, family members, health, freedom of movement, graduation. I didn't expect to, and I don't mean me, but as an example, like I didn't expect to be spending this summer of my junior year locked up with these people who I don't really like. There's a lot of reasons why we're having difficult times right now. And so I know in my own way, I'm having a different experience, but some anxiety really washed over me, and to the point where yesterday morning I was experiencing heart palpitations and shortness of breath, and I was having a hard time eating, and I definitely didn't sleep very much the night before. And so I had a really hard time. And so I pulled out my bag of tricks, as it were, which is really kind of amazing. And so I was like, all right, so what's going on in my head? Like what, and so I was like, first of all, I needed to reframe, like, am I safe? Like, what's going on? Like, what am I, is it, is this, I'm going to be moving soon. So is it that, is it COVID? Is it? And so I just started trying to figure that out and sort of working that out. And I started, practicing gratitude, which is very helpful for me because it helps me put things in perspective, as to like what's going well versus only focusing on what's not going well. And then I was like, okay, so I also know that exercise helps boost certain chemicals in the body, dopamine, serotonin, neuroepinephrine. And so I just, for 15 minutes, I was grinding on jumping jacks and push-ups and sit-ups, and I didn't want to do it, but I was like, I know that this is probably going to be very helpful for me to boost my mood, which is really a lot of what I needed. And it was very helpful. And then I checked in with friends, and then I wrote a piece for another school, and we were, just to be able to offer some hope and some healing. So then I was able to be of service. And so I'm not out of the woods. Like I'm still like, my stomach kind of still feels like it's like, right about here instead of, where it's supposed to be, down in my stomach. But to know that I have that movement, and I'm able to manage that, I offer that to you because, first of all, I want you to know that whatever you're going through at the moment, you're allowed to go through that. You're allowed to cry. You're allowed to have difficult time. You're allowed to honor that. You're allowed to grieve. And just because maybe you think that whatever experience that you're having right now isn't as bad as somebody else's, you're still allowed to have that experience. We don't have to play that comparison. we can certainly use it as a point of gratitude and put things in perspective, as in like things could be worse, and and I'm grateful that they're not, but we're allowed to have the experience that we're experiencing and not have to compare it to somebody else's, to mitigate and marginalize our own experience. We're allowed to have that. So I wanted to throw that out. Also, men, women, children, anybody, we're allowed to cry. You're allowed to grieve. I wanted to be super productive yesterday, and I still was, but at the same time, I also needed to practice self-care and rest a little bit and go for extra long walks and focus on my breathing. And so sometimes we can't just push through it, right? We need to just take a moment and be still and allow this sadness and the grief to try to teach us something, because I think that's it's there for that as well. So what I want to do with this, and I just wanted to toss that at you. Oh, one other thing that came to my mind, and then so I'll share this one other thing, and then I want to share some of my story and some of my crises and previous traumas, specifically one. And so I'm going to tell a story. It's going to be my story and some things that I've been through. And the reason I want to do that, because then I can relay that story and use it as a tool to talk about mental health and mental health coping and some things around resiliency and coping with trauma. Because I've been through some pretty major things in my life that I wouldn't wish on my worst enemy. And I truly mean that. And I've been telling versions of this story, but the same story. It's all a true story. But I've been telling this story for about 8.5, almost 9 years, and all over the United States and the world, Canada, Australia, England. And so I want to use it as a tool to make some points and hopefully provide some hope and some opportunities for healing and a path forward, even. Because we don't necessarily know what's going to happen next, but what we do know is what we can control up here, and this is what's the most important thing right now. So one other thing I wanted to throw at you, and then we'll dive in the story, and then I'll kind of touch on some learning objectives. But this is going through this time right now, and I'm in Los Angeles, by the way, and so we've been basically on home lockdown, quarantine, stay at home since about the 13th of March. So it's been about a month and a half. And the other day I realized I haven't touched another human being in almost 60 days. And that's a weird thing for me because I'm a hugger. But nevertheless, we've been on lockdown for a good while. And I freaked out in the beginning. It was really hard. And then I started thinking more about this time. And I was like, man, I've been through so many difficult things, like apparent suicide, trauma, homicide, my own, crises, having been in suicidal crisis about nine and a half years ago, and all these things. And I remember when I lost my dad to suicide about 11 years ago, and that's a big part of the story that I'm going to tell in a little bit. I was basically kicking and screaming. It was the first major trauma that I had ever been through, and then a subsequent series of traumatic events followed that over the next 2.5 years. And I was kicking and screaming. I was really upset about it. And I was allowed to have that experience. But a friend of mine pulled me aside, and he was like, and he totally validated what I was going through. And he was like, and I said to him, I was like, why is all this stuff happening to me? And he said to me, Josh, I don't know. And I feel you, but here's something you might want to consider. Instead of saying that to yourself, why is this happening to me? Maybe reframe it as, hey, what about everything is, all these things, everything is happening for me and not to me, right? So everything is happening for me and not to me. And he was like, it's a choice that you can make. You don't have to make that choice. You don't have to take on that mindset. But if everything is happening for you and not to you, then you get a chance to choose to try to look for a lesson or a way to find different coping mechanisms and skills to get you through this period of time or these other periods of time that will inevitably come up, because bad things happen in life and bad things happen to good people, right? So that changed my life. And it took me a little while to adopt that mindset and to maybe stop kicking and screaming for a little while. But it was just such a valuable thing, because it really drove home the point that I can't choose the things that life throws my way, like COVID, like a parent's death, like a few other things, right? But I can choose how I respond to it and how I react. And that's a choice we all get to make. And I'm not going to tell you have to do that. That far be it from me. You're a human being. You have dignity. You have personhood. And I want to honor that, right? So I would never tell you you have to do anything. But I would say that that's reframing this period of time and seeing what we can take from it for ourselves, like what we can learn. And for me, like some of the things I'm learning right now, and then we'll go to the story. But what I'm learning right now is to be a little more still at times. I'm learning that I need to trust others a little more, even more than I have been. I'm learning how to give back to my community in different ways. I'm learning that sometimes my anger is actually grief. Not all the time, but sometimes. I'm learning a lot of different things. And I'm also learning just how to take care of myself in a different way in my community. So these are things that I'm learning, and there's a lot more that I can learn. And I'm always never close enough to being my best self, and so that's always a process too, and all of us are. But I just wanted to share that piece with you as well, and hopefully that provides a little spark, something that maybe leads you to an even bigger and better idea, because ultimately you are the boss of your body and of your life. So let me jump into this story for a moment, and then hopefully too, we might have some time for some questions. I think Nathan or Lost&Found or some others are going to kick some of those towards the end as well. We have about an hour, so I think it's about 1:12. 1:12 Central Time, 2:12 Eastern Time, and it's 11:12 where I live on Pacific Time. So that being said, so just in case you're just joining us, this is How to Live Mentally Well and Crush in Difficult Times. It's sponsored by Lost&Found, LA Prevention. .org, and their social media handles are Resilient Today, both on Instagram and on Facebook. And I'm Josh Rivedal with the Impossible Project. So I'm going to share a little story with you and use it as a tool so we can then talk about mental health and wellness and resiliency and how to get through these times. So I grew up in New Jersey, not my fault, please don't hold it against me. But I grew up in New Jersey, and I was the middle child of three. My sister's a year older. My brother's about 4.5, 5 years younger. My parents were together, and they were very involved in community and the church that we went to, and where I came from. And I can certainly tell you that this is not as important to me as it was when I was a little person. But my family was very, very involved in church. My dad was a deacon. They sang all the time. I think we went to like 3 or 4 services every week, and then I went to school there. So I was there almost every single day, like literally. And then we were involved, as I said, in the community, like politics, marches, things like that. And when people looked at us, they, on a certain level, I think they thought that we had it all together. I mean, we're certainly ensconced in poverty. We definitely struggled with finances and home situation. But I think a lot of people thought we had it all together. And there's this idea of this like white picket fence, right? Like, and I think a lot of us have heard that analogy, like the white picket fence. It's like whatever your idea of perfection is. It could be like the 2.5 kids, the dog in the house. It could be I want to be a professional athlete. It could be I want all the girls or the guys. It could be I want the PhD, whatever that means to you. And what I find interesting is that when we talk about this idea of the white picket fence, and we see somebody, we project that onto somebody else, we're not always taking into account what that person's looking at on the other side of that fence, right? And in a metaphorical sense, of course, what they might be experiencing. And I'll tell you, like my side of my fence, what I was looking at was cracked and chipped and broken. And I was struggling as a little person, my adolescence. We had a couple big secrets in my family. And one of them was that my father was an abuser. He was physically abusive with me and sometimes my siblings. And he was emotionally abusive with his kids and his wife, my mother. And that definitely plays an impact on one's mental health and wellness for sure. And if I was doing a different session, I would definitely love to talk about how the trauma of abuse affects the brain and how we can overcome and move forward. And I'll try to sprinkle some of that in, but it's definitely not going to be a major focus. But it's something to think about, because as a little person, when I was trying to protect myself in my head based on some of the actions that I saw my father doing. And so doing that, it protected me, 8, 9, 10 years old. But then I was subconsciously using some of those same coping mechanisms and skills as an adult before I really understood what abuse meant. And these things were detrimental to me and the people around me. I didn't need to put up walls. I didn't need to act out. I didn't need to do these things. And I didn't understand that until I went through some therapeutic counseling and did some reading, things like that. So I just want to put a pushpin in that, just to throw that out there, and to know that, and let you know that there is healing beyond that piece as well. And that's not going to be a major focus of this talk. The other thing that was a big secret in my family was that my father's father, my grandfather, died by suicide in 1966. So that was a long time before I was born. My dad at the time was 17. His dad was almost 50. And it was something we never talked about in the home. My dad was ashamed about it. In fact, my mother pulled my sister and me aside when I was 12. My sister was 13. My brother was, again, like 5 years younger. So he didn't get this information. But my mom basically pulled my sister and me aside and said, this is what happened to your grandfather. Don't tell your dad you know about it. He would be super angry, and we knew what that meant. There'd probably be some abuse involved if he found out. And so she was like, this is why he is the way he is, because he was, again, very, especially emotionally abusive. But she was like, this is why your dad is the way he is. Now go run along. And so my mom didn't at the time understand, that we also needed to hear about hope and healing. And that's not her fault, right? I truly believe, for the most part, most of us are doing the best we can with the information that we have at any given moment. But I learned something that day, and it's not a lesson that you want to learn. It's a lesson that was implied, and I don't advocate for this lesson, but it's something that I took away erroneously as a little person, as a 12-year-old. I learned that when something bad happens in life and you feel like you can't handle it, keep it a secret, right? And that's not a lesson that we want to learn. We got to talk about our stuff. We can't let our fears own us. In fact, I'll tell you this, I've already mentioned my depression and anxiety, but when I was young, I didn't get diagnosed with those things until I was 28 years old. And yet I can remember being around age 8 and remembering vividly some symptoms that I know what they are at age 28, 29. I'm 36 now, so I've had the diagnosis for about 8 years. But I remember being a young person and vividly remembering some of these symptoms and not knowing what to do about it and not talking about it because we didn't talk about stuff like that, even though we should have and we could have and we can now even too. But we didn't talk about it. And so I thought, well, boys don't talk and boys don't cry, and maybe I'm the only one going through this. And so I kept it a secret for 20 years. And these are health conditions. And when we don't take care of our health, whether it's something in our brain or our heart or our pancreas, whatever, it could have detrimental effects on the body and on the brain. And it certainly did for me. And I did say health condition. I definitely said health condition because, I'm talking about my mental health. Yes, for sure. Like generalized anxiety disorder, clinical depression. Absolutely. But this is an organ, right? And so this is physical health. So this is an organ, just like the heart is an organ, just like the pancreas is an organ. And yet we don't treat this the same way that we treat the other ones, right? And so we need to start doing something a little bit different about that, right? That we treat like there's like a line here and this is your body and this is just some funny magical thing we can't talk about. No, you've got a machine up here, a Maserati, a Rolls Royce. Some of you, an old beat up Geo Metro, none of my business. Haha, just kidding. You're beautiful. But no, we've got a machine up here that we've got to take care of. And if this isn't going well, the rest of it's not going well. And I didn't understand that until age 28. And I want to offer this to you wherever you are in your journey, whether you're 98, whether you're 8, it's really, really important to understand. And let me tell you something too, because I've had the diagnosis for depression and anxiety for about 8 years. And I talked a little bit about my anxiety, but really what I usually have to deal with more of is the depression. And so let me bump that out to you for a second, because I think this is important, because 20% of the people, statistically speaking, 20% of the people who are watching this are living with some kind of mental health condition, depression, anxiety, bipolar, OCD, postpartum, right? Out of those people who are living with that, and me included, right? Only a third of us are getting help, right? So, And that's due to stigma, that's due maybe to access, that's due to cultural differences and things like that. But there's different ways we can all get help depending on our culture. Nevertheless, I just want to talk briefly about what my depression means to me, because it looks different on different people, right? So the way it manifests on you might be different than the way it manifests in me, right? So that's important to know. You know, your symptoms are not going to look the same as your friend who may have it as well, right? So mine, it's not that big of a beast. Like, I know some of my triggers at this point. I know for the most part, like if this is like quote unquote like a normal mood, if this is where it is, like my mood kind of like is down here typically. So I do take a little bit of medicine to kind of bump it up here. It's called Wellbutrin, but it doesn't complete the circle. Like, it's not like I can't just take medicine and it be, all as well. Like, I have to go talk to somebody. I got to talk to a counselor. I have amazing friends. I practice gratitude. I live in a decent space that I've created for myself. I'm 36, so I got, your coping mechanisms at 36. I got a house plant. Wow, that's amazing. And I'm helping that grow. And I'm trying to be of service as much as possible in different ways. So, and there's way more. I'm back in school. So there's a lot of different things that I do to manage that. And so at this point, like, I've had this diagnosis for about 8 years, and it's really the one I pay attention to the most. And so at times, because I've been working so hard on my mental health and wellness for 8 years, like, sometimes I think about my depression as like dancing with a boxer, like with a prize fighter, right? And so that thing is boxing and dancing with me. And so for me, like, sometimes I can see that depression, I can see that jab coming, right? And so then I can kind of duck a little bit, and so instead of it hitting me in the nose, it hits me in the cheek instead. And so I can mitigate my symptoms and I can manage. And that's a little bit of what I do with my anxiety yesterday, as I mentioned, right? Exercise, right? Boom, checking with friends, taking a walk, making sure I'm eating well, things like that, right? So there's things we can do to mitigate our symptoms. So I throw that out there because these are not death sentences, right? Everything happens for a reason if you choose it, right? And so I choose to frame my relationship with my depression and anxiety a little bit differently. And sometimes I wish they don't exist, for sure, but I know that they're not going anywhere. So I can't control them, but I can manage them, right? And so y'all can do the same thing for yourselves if you have it. We can manage our symptoms. We can manage what we're going through. We might necessarily be able to control it, but you can manage it. You manage diabetes. You manage kidney disease. You can manage your depression. You can manage your anxiety. So I just wanted to toss that out to you before I move along with the story, because I just think it's so important when we talk about mental illness and not necessarily mental health, that we know that that's something that we can manage, right? And there's hope. And today is about hope. This moment is about hope, right? So fast forward, I told you I was 12. I got that information about my dad's dad dying by suicide when I was age 12, and it happened long before I was born. But moving forward, age 19, I finally moved out of my parents' house, and I moved to New York City, became a professional actor, was doing off-Broadway stuff, was doing regional stuff, doing voiceovers, was writing for the theater, got stuff produced in Miami and all over the United States. And it was really incredible. Age 24, my parents went through a divorce. They started going through this divorce. They'd been married for 30 years and unhappy for about all but one of those days. So the struggle was real with them. And so my mom finally decided to take off, and I don't blame her. And that's made my dad, well, I wouldn't say it made my dad, but my dad responded not in a way that we expected. We thought he might become violent or do something harmful to someone else, but he took a downward spiral pretty quickly. And March 31, 2009, the day that they were supposed to finalize the divorce, my dad died by suicide. And so I lost my grandfather, whom I'd never met, and then I lost my dad, and I was age 25 and he was 60. And though I didn't like my dad, I loved him, and I didn't want him to die. And I could see that he was suffering, and I could see that he was in tremendous emotional pain after the fact. I didn't quite understand it when he was going through it, but I still tried to be there. And so it was really, really hard for me to reconcile. So over the next 2 years, my professional life was taking off, and my personal life was taking a nosedive. And so in the span of 20 months after losing my dad, like my life was completely in chaos and trauma. And I had no vocabulary around mental health or suicide prevention or resiliency. And so, so during this time, so I lost my dad. My mother, who had always been super cool and kind, we went through a difficult period where more or less she sued my dad's estate, which meant she sued me and my brother and sister for the inheritance that he left us. And that was a very difficult thing. And I didn't quite understand what all that meant. So I took it really hard and we stopped talking. And it's a little deeper and darker than that, but that's as much as, without going into all that. And then my girlfriend of 6 years, who I'd been with for 5.5, she took off, and I don't blame her for that either, because I wasn't a great partner at the time, and I had a really, just difficult time being with people in general. And so I lost, in the span of 20 months, I lost 3 major people all at one time. And that compounded, so that's a lot of major change happening. I was going to a new school. I was back in school. So I was back in school. I was starting a new job. So a lot of major change at one time can be a catalyst, not the cause, but catalyst for suicidal ideation, and as well as undiagnosed or untreated health conditions, mental health or physical health. And so it certainly was that for me. And so over the course of 6 weeks, in the beginning of 2011, 2 weeks, so up through the middle of February, about a week and a half before I was about to turn 27, I started thinking that this is for 6 weeks, that nobody loved me, nobody cared about me, and I was a burden, and that the world would be better off if I weren't in it. And that wasn't true, but I didn't understand that at the time. Like, I wasn't weak or bad or sinful or wrong or stupid or crazy. I was just a human being in need of help, truly. I didn't want to die. I just didn't want to feel the way that I was feeling, and I didn't understand the coping mechanisms and skills that I could have built, and the people that I could reach out to who would have in a second would have loved to help me out. If only I could have seen that and had that perspective at the time. And I don't judge myself or make myself out to be less than or worthless because I didn't have that thought process at the time. I just didn't understand. You know what you know, and you don't know what you don't know. So, and those things that I was thinking, I'm burdened and I'm messed up and all that, like, it wasn't true, right? Like, we talk about knee aches and back aches. I was having a psych ache at the time. It was treatable and it was management. I just didn't know that at the time, right? So luckily, middle of February, I took a risk and I nearly attempted, and I reached out to the last person in the world that I wanted to talk to. I reached out to my mom because I was kind of, a bit of a baby. I was a bit natal. I just didn't know what to do or who else to reach out to. And I was so very fortunate because in that phone call, my mom became my mom again, and she helped me, right? And from there, that planted a seed. And that seed was like, wow, if she cares for me, maybe somebody else will. And maybe I can do something different. Maybe there are adventures to have, and there's things, and maybe I can feel better tomorrow and feel a little better the next day. And so I would say it took me about 9 months to feel like me again. But in that 9-month period, there was like 2 steps forward, 1 step back certain days. But I started researching, because I knew that the way I had been living life up until that period, I had zero resilience. I had cultivated almost zero resiliency. And I needed to do different things. So I needed to pay attention to my brain and my mental health and my body, and what is my body trying to say to me when I'm going through this difficult time? What is my brain trying to tell me as I'm going through this difficult time? I started getting into counseling. I was very lucky to have vibed with that person at my university's counseling center at the time. I was going to school in New York City at Baruch College. I was very, very fortunate to have support there. And started to reach out to the kind, compassionate, hustling, good friends and ditching the negative, because you're the company that you keep. And there was this really amazing happy accident I found. And then I was very fortunate some years later to do some more research on this thing that I sort of discovered. And there's an existing body of work around this. And then I was able to contribute to that existing body of work with a dear friend and colleague around offering help. Right? So this is interesting. Like, so when I was, and this is one of my pieces of recovery out of my suicidal ideation period in the beginning of 2011. But I was helping this elderly woman. I lived in uptown in New York City in Manhattan. And so I lived in a very big building, and I noticed there was an elderly woman who kind of did it old school, and she would go out every day and get a couple things at the market, whether it was the meat market or the bread market or whatever. She would do it old school. And so she always had a hard time getting in the building because the door was super heavy. And I kind of timed it out, like not in a creepy way, but I was home a lot and I was catatonic and I just wasn't feeling well. But one day I just really wanted to help her out. So I helped her in and out. And I noticed that I felt a little bit better and I felt a little more buoyant in that moment. And so I started playing with that feeling and started, just little by little, just trying to help people, mostly her at that time, because I couldn't really do much else. And then sort of snowballed and mushroomed. And I realized through counseling and through that and through self-discovery, I was like, to be whole again, I need to be in the service of other people in one way or another while practicing self-care, not going overboard and like depleting myself of energy and just making myself ragged. But what I needed to do was to be in the service of others, to feel whole again. And so that was a very big part of my recovery. And so from there, I started doing research and taking care of myself. And I was like, wow, well, maybe I can start helping other people. And so I started getting trained in mental health and suicide prevention. And from there, I've spoken in about 400 different locations, and there's lots of books and that I've written in journal papers that I've been a co-author on, and a podcast, and establishing cool friendships with people named Nathan who work for Lost&Found. And by the way, if you're here for the first time, this is How to Live Mentally Well and Crush It During Difficult Times. I'm Josh Rivedal with the Impossible Project. We talk about mental health, suicide prevention, diverse experiences, and this session, this talk, is brought to you by Lost&Found. And their social media handles are at Resilience Today on Instagram and on Facebook. And they're incredible, and I highly recommend that you check them out. But as moving forward on my story, in the sort of the pièce de résistance in a way, is that I needed to start paying attention to my mental health, hands down, every single day. And it's interesting. I do these talks all, different places, mostly colleges, and then a good portion high schools, middle schools. And especially when I do a middle and a high school, I'll ask the people in the room, and I'll go, by a raise of hands, how many people in the room have mental health? And people start to look around, and their eyes kind of get a little funky, and like maybe half the room starts to raise their hands, and there's a few other like peer pressure hand, like, oh, okay, like maybe I should raise my hand too. And other people are like, what are you talking about, dog? Like, what is this? And so, it's a trick question, because we all have mental health. Like, all of us have mental health. It's not just mental illness. We typically, when we talk about mental health, a lot of us, I think about somebody with a problem, but that's not what mental health is. Mental health is a person's psychological and emotional well-being. It's how we handle the good times and the bad times. It's simple as that. It's a person's psychological and emotional well-being. So what is mental health then? Or let me tell you what it's not. It's not necessarily debilitating, right? It's not the same as an illness or a disorder. It's not a character flaw or weakness. Like I could tell you my story, and I know so many people, and I can connect to so many people who speak openly about mental health. And a lot of times it's us who have struggled with our mental health at times in the past. And a lot of us struggle and are maybe unintentional or don't quite understand what's happening. So we do some things, and we hit on a few things that are very helpful. I've had to be super intentional. It doesn't make me better or worse than anybody else. It's just my experience. And so I've had to be super intentional about my stuff and what I've been through. And I can tell you that what I've been through is not a character flaw. It's not a weakness. I didn't do anything to get depression. I didn't do anything to get anxiety. I'm not milking it. I don't need the attention. I want to live on a farm. I just got excited and like basically almost ripped my computer charger out. I could do with an anonymity. I could, but I feel like life is better served, being of service and doing talks like this and being helpful. And so I'm going to keep doing this. I'm going to keep banging my drum. I'm going to let people know that it's possible to present well, relatively speaking. I'll let you be the judge of that. But it's possible to present well and talk about your stuff and have difficult times and then say, yeah, like exactly kind of what happened with me yesterday, right? Like I was able to hold conversations and hold space with people and be giving, and then also ask for what I need. And like, hey, I'm struggling. Also, like I just completed a 2-page paper. What, you know? So it's possible to struggle and still do well, you know, and I want to put a positive face on that. So mental health is not debilitating. It's not a flaw. It's not a weakness, right? And in fact, the people who I know who pay more attention to their mental health, yeah, we might struggle at times, as all of us do. It's some of the strongest, most tremendous, incredible people, because just the depth of what they've been through, and how hard they have to fight, and it's inspiring, right? Mental health, it affects everybody, right? Let me tell you a little bit about what it is real quick. Like, it affects everybody. It's a little different for everybody too. Like some of the things that I used to cope, like my, you know, comedy, I approach things with a lot of humor. Like that's just how I work. It's not always met well, like in certain interpersonal relationships. Some people can't handle that. So I, you know, sometimes I have to like read the room better. And I don't mean like when I'm talking about like talking in public spaces. I mean like, you know, interpersonal relationships. So so I gotta put my empathy hat on a little bit too. But what I'm saying is like, so I deal with my mental health sometimes with humor. Like I had a really good laugh, not an unhinged laugh, as it were, but just like I was like, this is kind of funny. Like this is really tragic, and that was just my experience. And I still had a hard time with it, but like I deal with, I tell jokes. You know, that's what I do. You know, so it's and I do different things. I go for walks, I go for runs, I take Taekwondo. You know, not everybody wants to do that. Not everybody else is able to do that. We all have different abilities too. It's a little different for everybody, right? It takes time and energy to develop. What I do today, a lot of it is what I did 8-9 years ago, but then there's other things that I do now too. The house plant is new. I'm gonna try to grow tomatoes in my window or something pretty soon. Like that's a coping mechanism. Like I'd like to bring life to something. You know, so there's a lot of different things that I do, and some of them I do now, and some of them I didn't do in the past. And I'm always trying to refine and do different things and learn about my body and my brain. And we all have that opportunity. And the mental health also has our biology, our life experience, and our family history. I can tell you again, like the abuse that I experienced at the hands of my dad as a young person, that definitely affects how I respond to certain things in life. And I've had to make a really, really conscious effort to move through that and to cope differently, and to talk about my stuff and not to hide. In the past, I've wanted to hide and avoid certain situations, and I know that I can't do that, and I've got to face my fears. So that's one element of what maybe family history how it could affect your mental health and wellness. But what's really amazing is that we are not slaves to our heritage, our brains. We can make choices. We can put in safety nets. I am not doomed to die by suicide. I am not doomed to be an abusive father. I am not doomed to any of that, because I can work my butt off to do different and to make change and to be there. And I can already see the fruits of that. I have little nieces and nephews, and they're so beautiful, and they're like all under the age of 4. And I just see myself, because I'm not a parent yet, but I can see myself doing differently than what my own dad did, in the way that I nurture and just hold them. And I sometimes, you know, they drive me a little crazy, you know, and I could feel them temper boiling inside of me, like probably what happened with my dad. And so I'm going to walk away, and I'm going to reframe, and I'm going to come back. I'm not going to respond out of anger, right? So I'm just throwing that out there, because, and that's just one little example, and you put it to where you put it for your brain and your life, but you are not doomed to be the mistakes of the past. Whether that was in family, whether that was your own, you know, we're not doomed to that. I want to talk a little bit about maybe some vocab for a second. Like, and it's like the Facebook Live, I love it, but it's a little clunky with screen sharing, which is fine. It's all good. So I'm not going to screen share. Like I'm working off a slide on my computer just for my own notes. But I wouldn't say necessarily created, but like I have something called a mental health meter. I think it's really important to know what we're going through. If you could picture this, there's like 3 different little meters, like almost like if you were inside of a car and you were looking at like the speedometer and the odometer and like whatever the one that measures the revolutions. I'm not a car guy. I'm an actor, guys. Come on. But you know, so there's 3 meters. right? And one could say bad day, one would say situational, one would say illness and condition, right? So there's 3 different meters, and like, it can go from everything's fine to like danger, right? So the meter kind of is this half circle, right? And there's 3 different, there's bad day, situational, illness, and condition. And the reason I think it's important to talk about a mental health meter is because we don't know exactly what we're talking about all the time when we throw out mental health terms and when we talk about what's happening inside of our body. Case in point, I hear people, and I know this is sort of a throwaway and kind of a joke, but it's a microcosm, I think, of a greater symptom, as it were, of not knowing what we're talking about when we're discussing mental health. So I hear people say stuff like, "Oh, the weather's so schizophrenic. My cat's so bipolar, and I'm so OCD because I really like to have 5 pencils on my table at all times." And I'm willing to unwrap that with you for sure. But chances are you probably don't have OCD. I definitely know that your cat's not bipolar, or that the weather is schizophrenic, right? And then another little point to drive this whole thing home is, I'll hear somebody say, "Oh man, like the Cardinals lost last week, and my girlfriend yelled at me this morning and I stubbed my toe and I'm so depressed." Like, and again, I'm willing to unwrap that with you, but I think it's important to really work inside the brain and the body and think like, am I depressed? Am I experiencing depression, or am I having a bad day? Am I having a bad day? And so there, you can have a bad day. You could be experiencing a situational crisis, or you can be experiencing an illness and condition, or you can be experiencing all 2 or all 3 happening at one time. Back in 2011, I was having, when I was going through my suicidal crisis, I was experiencing a bad day where like, the meter was probably closer to the danger rather than everything's fine and safe and whatever. But I was experiencing a bad day. I was experiencing a situational crisis, and I was also experiencing chronic mental 2 chronic mental health conditions that were not being treated at the time. So what's really kind of cool right now that I can sort of identify, if I have my own mental health meter in my own life, there are some days where the bad day meter is kind of in the middle, maybe a little closer to danger than everything is fine. The situational piece, situational crisis being this COVID, what's happening right now, I'd say on the daily, it's somewhere in the middle, sometimes a little closer to danger, sometimes a little closer to safe. And the illness and condition, actually, for the most part, is closer to safe and calm, with the exception of maybe the last 36 hours. And then what I'd been experiencing about 4 weeks ago, 5 weeks ago, when the brunt of this really started to hit home in my brain. So personally, I know kind of what I need for treatment and care and self-care based on this. Because if we don't know what we're dealing with, then we won't know how to treat it, right? We won't know how the proper help that we need to ask for. So very important. That's why I like to talk about this mental health meter, and it may be driven home a little bit more if you were able to see a visual, but hopefully you could follow me with those 3 ideas, like having a bad day, a situational crisis, or illness and condition, and like how that can affect the treatment and the care that we provide ourselves, or the way that we're able to reach out for help. Coping mechanisms and skills. This is really, really important. How we're coping with the daily, the day-to-day, the good, the bad, the ugly. Coping skills, right? Gotta have me some coffee. Coping mechanisms. Really, coping skills are a combo of different tools that help you manage the things that life throws your way. And I used to be a gamer, like a video gamer, when I was more of a little kid, because I can't really anymore, because I get so engrossed in gameplay that I know my limits. And if I start on something that I really like, you might not see me for a week. So I just kind of keep that at bay, and I might play around once in a while with friends, like if I see them at their house or whatever. But the reason I bring the gamer thing up, because to me, coping mechanisms are a little bit like those cheat codes. If you remember, I don't know if they still have them, but back in the day, it wasn't that long ago, but a little while ago, we had cheat codes and skill, and so it was like up, down, B, Y, left, right, whatever. And so using that, you could kind of beat a level faster. You could have extra tools. You could skip a whole level. And that's what coping skills are for me. Like, they help me move through life a little bit easier, a little bit quicker, a little bit more efficiently, a little more self-aware, right? And so healthy coping skills, because you can cope unhealthfully too. Like I've certainly in my past, especially when I was prior to my crisis, my suicidal crisis back in 2011, I certainly was misusing and abusing substances. And so that would certainly be an unhealthy coping mechanism. But like, let's talk about healthy coping mechanisms and skills for a moment. They're different for everybody, for sure. I mean, I'm a big proponent of, we got to talk about our stuff. We need a support system, and we need to move our bodies a bit, but how that looks, like, you fill in with your own colors. If you are a big fan of sprinkles and rainbows, like, you color with the sprinkles and rainbows. If you like, a little more gray and a little more charcoal blue, do you, boo-boo? Like, you're allowed to do what you need. And that's really, really important. There's no one size fits all. So I'll never tell you have to do this or this or this or that, right? That's nonsense. Like, you're a human, you have personhood, you have dignity, and I'd love to honor that. I'm always happy to, in my personal relationships, and sometimes when I'm on stage speaking, but just to honor that and to have a full conversation. Like, what makes you feel safe? What makes you feel healthy? What are some things that are good for you and healthy for you? Self-care, relaxation, whatever, right? Cool thing about coping skills as well, they're open source, right? They can be modified. They can be changed anytime. You can modify them to fit your purposes. Instead of going for a marathon run, just as an example, you're like, I'm getting shin splints. This is, I love running, but maybe I'll start doing half marathons instead of full marathons. And certainly these things take time and energy to develop, right? So like learning any new skill, like, it always takes a little extra time. So please, please, please be gentle with yourself as you're learning this new stuff. I implore you, please and thank you. It's sometimes it's really hard to be, forgiving or gentle with ourselves, and we sometimes can be our own harshest critic. So I just want to say, please be gentle. I'm going to throw some categories at you of some healthy coping mechanisms that might be helpful now and or in the future, like a healthy support system for sure. And I know that's not always easy, especially when we're quarantining or in lockdown or in, stay at home or physically distancing. I don't like the word social distancing, because we need each other and we need our fellows and our cohorts and our communities. And so we can certainly, and we're very fortunate to live in the age of some pretty amazing technology. I can't imagine going through this crisis in 1632, because we'll be relying on carrier pigeons and not Facebook Live. So I can put that down in my head as a piece of gratitude. But we do need a healthy support system, and ideally that's going to be by and large it's going to be human beings. But your part of your support system could be your houseplant, it could be your puppy, it could be your the people who you mentor. There's a lot of different ways that a healthy support system can exist. It could be your primary care physician, it could be your psychiatrist or psychologist. There's so many different ways. I think as soon as I start growing a plant, hopefully my green thumb will be successful. I'm not the best gardener, but I want to try. But hopefully that will even be part of my support system. It's just knowing that I'm keeping something alive, right? Healthy distractions, like, we're allowed to. You don't have to be super productive right now. You don't have to be. You can be. You can choose to make that a coping mechanism and a skill, but you don't have anything to prove to anybody right now. We're all, in a way, we're having a shared experience. We're dealing with it differently. The brunt of it is being felt differently. So I definitely want to honor that and say, I don't want to say that we're all in the same boat, because we're all rowing different kinds of boats, and some people have yachts and some people are floating on boards, speaking of the metaphor. But I do want to say that we're all struggling in different ways. And so that certainly can be honored. And because of that, we need to practice self-care and take on healthy distractions whenever we can. And that could mean a lot of different things. It could be TV. It could be this Facebook Live that you're on right now. It's going to be recorded, so we'll be able to share it again. Relaxation, self-care is so super important. It's like that, excuse me. It's like that if you've ever been on a plane and they give you the whole spiel in the beginning about the safety, whatever the safety stuff they talk about. And one of the things is, make sure you put on your mask before you put on somebody else's mask. Like, help you first and then help somebody else. So self-care is so important, because and I know this for me too. If I'm constantly filling up other people's cups and not my own, I'm running depleted. I'm trying to help people when I'm out here on these streets at 50% capacity, and I need to be closer to 100, right? So what do I need to do? And that could mean setting boundaries. That could mean saying, like, hey, I know 6 people just asked me for help. I can only help 3. The other 3, it's not a no forever, it's just a no for now, right? So you're able to maybe set those boundaries in the interest of self-care. There's service-based activities is really, really important. Like, this is so huge. And I could definitely talk about some of the science behind it. We don't have a ton of time to do that, but service-based activities is one of the quickest ways. It's like, it's not inside out work, it's outside in work. And that's okay. We got to do both at different times in our lives. We got to work on our outside so that we can emanate something good from the inside, and vice versa, right? So service-based activities, being of service, it could be helping a kid tie their shoes. It could be helping your mom not boomer the hell out of Zoom for her work. I don't know. Like, there could be lots of different things. Service-based activities. It's a great way to boost self-esteem, self-confidence, self-worth, find purpose, find meaning, right? And it's just that gives that little boost. And over a period of time, those sustained actions will continue to help you grow and learn. And there's an incredible body of research out there that supports the development and boosting of certain chemicals that are very helpful to regulate your mood when we help other people. It's really interesting. If you're familiar with any 12-step programs, Alcoholics Anonymous, Narcotics Anonymous, Overeaters Anonymous, a lot of them prioritize helping other people. Like the old timers who've been, let's say they've been sober for 20 years. They claim, and I believe this, that they stay sober because they're helping the new timers stay sober. And so by helping other people, they're actually helping themselves. So that's maybe just another way to put it. Energetic activities or exercise, for sure. A little bit of a challenge. Some of us are strictly staying indoors. That's fine. Not all of us are. That's fine too. Balance, safety, all that, right? For sure. But, whatever that means, but we got to get the heart rate moving. We got to get the blood pumping one way or another. And there's a lot of different ways to do that. And I'm not going to get into, I'm not your nutritionist. Wish I could be, but I can't wear all those hats. Things we consume are also really important. Food, medicine, other substances. So like I know personally, and I've been playing with this because I like coffee. I drink a lot of coffee every day, but I also know that around noon, 1 o'clock, if I keep drinking coffee, like, it's going to mess with my appetite, which is going to mess with the nourishment that I can take into my body, and it's also probably going to mess with my sleep a little bit too. So I got to be careful about that. And like the last healthy coping category is reducing your workload, and we can do that. Like, this is the time. This is certainly a time. It could be the time for that, but sometimes we just need to take on that unrest. And there's one other thing before we I think we have about 6 minutes or so left, and I want to my coffee's gone. I want to, so it's good timing. It's noon. I told you I can't be drinking coffee after noon. Yeah. So how to help another person. I think that's really, really important. How to help someone in crisis, because we're all having a difficult time. I know some of us want to be of service to our friends and family and loved ones. And this might also flip it, right? You might be able to then learn how to ask for what you need if you are in crisis, if you're having a hard time. The base of what we need to do when we're trying to help somebody, if somebody comes to us and is asking for our help, or if we recognize somebody needs our help, the best thing that we can do is to listen to them. Listen some more. Like, we cannot fix anybody. It's impossible. You can't do it. In the history of the universe, nobody's ever fixed another person. All of us, and I believe this, and I've put this theory to the test in my own experience, and I've been able to work as a community counselor, as a volunteer. So I'm not trained in as a professional counselor, but I certainly have community counseling skills to where I'm able to volunteer. So I believe, and I've seen and I've witnessed this, that everybody has everything inside them already to be happy, complete, fulfilled, and whole. Right? We're not broken. Many of us are very, very bent, but we're not broken, right? So that means that we don't need someone to try to fix us. We need somebody to help facilitate greatness out of us. You can facilitate, you can't teach. Let me say it again. You can facilitate, you can't teach. If you are in crisis, you are the CEO, and you're the CEO and the boss and the president anyway. But when you're in crisis, you don't need somebody to try to jump in and try to fix you. And like, I know what to do because I can be a better president. No, you can't, because this is my life. What you can do is like, hey, I'm a really great Secretary of Defense. I'm a great Secretary of State. I'm a great housing development, like HUD coordinator, right? So like we can fill these other roles and help people and lift them up and boost them up and offer them ideas if they allow us to, if we ask permission. But the best thing that we can do, and actually this is what I'll do, and this is how I frame it when people come to me and they say, Josh, I need help, or I need some. So first of all, let me ask you this, and I'll ask them this. I'll say, would you like advice? Would you like to scream? Would you like to yell? Would you like me to hold you? Would you like a hug? What can I do to be a best service for you right now? Sometimes I know, sometimes I don't. But at least I'm not dishonoring them in their intelligence and their personhood and their dignity by just assuming, right? So we ask what people need. And in turn, that actually helps me ask for what I need when I'm having a hard time. And now I know. I say, hey, listen, like I'm about to bring something up that's a little like funky for me. And I don't want advice right now. I just want you to like kind of just be present with me. That's just all I need from you right now. Or sometimes we'll ask advice, but I can ask for that and then get what I need and kind of recalibrate from there. Helping somebody, let's validate them too. Like, they talk about what they've been through, and like, just because it's not the way you would deal with it doesn't mean that the way that they're dealing with it isn't valid, because it is, right? So you can validate, wow, that's incredible. Like, wow, you're going through so much, and that sucks. That must be really hard. And then you validate too and say, well, I just want to let you know that you bring this up to me. I know it's really vulnerable and it's inspiring. And the fact that you're still suiting up and showing up and doing what you need to do, like, I'm just so proud of you. And just validate what people are going through, coming from a strengths-based place, because just because they're going through a hard time does not mean that they're deficient or messed up, or like, and just because like they're having a hard time and you're not, doesn't mean that you have to know it all, or that you're like up here and they're down here, because at some point you're going to have a hard time, and the metaphorical tables are going to be turned. We really want this, like we want this togetherness, right? So we don't want to, and so also like when you're helping somebody or you've been asked, it's good to be vulnerable and display the behavior you want somebody else to display. So if you want them to admit or talk about their struggle, maybe it's time for you to talk about a time you've been through a struggle as a way to normalize, like, hey, I've struggled before too. And this is one way of dealing with it. And this is one way of managing it. And I just want to let you know it's possible, but of course you're going to do whatever it is that you're going to do. And I'm going to be here for you as much as you want or need, right? Empathy. So empathy, not sympathy. So empathy is like, I feel you, rather than sympathy is like, I feel so bad for you, because we want empathy. Nobody wants to feel pitied or to feel less than, things like that. Be explicit that their life is important to you. Make sure that they're safe, that they're not going home to an unlocked XYZ, something that they can harm themselves with. And of course, referring and assisting to professional help. Right now, I just want to throw a couple of quick resources, and I know Lost&Found has some pretty great ones too. And Lost&Found at Resilient Today on Facebook and on Instagram. The National Suicide Prevention Hotline, I know we're not necessarily talking about suicide, but they have great resources on their site. They also, their phone number, 800-273-8255. If you're in crisis, if you know somebody in crisis, if you need additional resources, they're going to get somebody sort of in your relative localized area. So they're not going to get somebody, who's half across the country. They're going to find resources, and they're going to be very helpful. And there's amazing people on that, on those lines. Crisis text line, you can text GO to 741-741. Trevor Project, which is LGBTQ, 866-488-7386. So those are some things. Before we go, I just want to challenge everyone to take great care, to be safe, to be well, to be the change that you wish to see in the world. And that could mean a lot of different things, but we need to, grieve and mourn and go through our times. But there's also at some point, and it doesn't have to be all of us at one time, and we certainly get to honor our experience while searching for a way forward. But that means that, if you don't like something, you change it. And if you think something's always been the way that it is, it hasn't. Why can't any of us be the spark that lights the fire to change the world? Please don't ever let anyone tell you you're not big enough, small enough, brown enough, talented enough, old enough, young enough, anything enough. You're more than enough to be the change you wish to see in the world. And I also want to challenge you to tell your story, to speak up, speak out, and speak often, because what you've been through, whatever it is, big or small, could be very, very helpful to somebody else. We don't always know how we can affect other people's existences and experiences. And, the things that you might think are little have a lot of value. And when you bring it up, you have an opportunity to connect with other people who may not have felt comfortable bringing that up and talking about it. And when I was 8 years old, the depression and anxiety that I was experiencing was very, very little. But because I didn't deal with it and work on it for 20 years, it became a big bloody open wound, as it were, and it didn't have to be that way. So I just want to toss that out there. Like, your experiences have a great opportunity to connect, to help other people, big or small, whatever you're thinking. Like, it could have a profound effect, and we don't know. So speak out, speak up, speak often, tell your story. Please take care. Please be safe. Please be well, and know that I love you, and that I'm holding you in my heart. And I can't wait until I can be more than 6 feet away from you so I can give you a hug. But just so very, very grateful for this time that we've been able to share together. And thank you, Lost and Found, at Resilient Today, lafprevention.org. And I'm Josh Rivedal with the I'm Possible Project. So thank you so very much, and have a beautiful day. And we are going to end this live video. I'm 35 seconds over. Oh, just want to make sure. Yeah. Okay, no. Okay, cool. Yeah, we're done.